And we are back from the studio here in Lysekil. Racing is underway and we have less than 3 minutes to go until the first start of the 11th match. It's Pauline Courtois coming in from port against Danish Henriette Koch in the Switzer boat. Pauline Courtois sailing in the Sebago boat. And this is a giants meeting. Pauline Courtois is currently sitting at the top of the leaderboard, yet to be defeated in this competition. But I assure you that Danish team Katnaken will give her a run for her money. She is sitting on 4 wins and 1 loss from yesterday, tied for second in this competition. And we see them circling around, vying for position. Currently, Pauline Courtois is on starboard and Henriette Koch sailing away towards the cliff on port. But it's a dance, I tell you. They're chasing each other and finally reaching... the goal is to be first out of the hatch from the starting line. With less than 2 minutes to go now, the teams will hopefully start to making their way back to the starting line soon, currently positioning themselves slightly below and to the right of the starting line. So the course and the name of the game is 2 laps around this windward-leeward course. They will start, they will head up to the windward mark, they will hoist their gennackers, come down to the yellow cylinder buoy just above the starting line to once again go upwind to reach the top mark for the last time, hoisting their gennacker and blazing to the finish line. We have seen an increase in the very light winds we had initially, currently sitting at about 8 knots of wind, south to southeasterly direction, according to the prognosis, and hopefully we'll see an increase in this wind. Now both teams are heading up to the starting line, and we can see it's Danish team who are in the leeward position, meaning the French team will have to keep a right of way. But as they tack and head over to starboard, Pauline Courtois will do that leeward boat. We had an umpire call, but it was a green flag, meaning that one of the teams called a protest situation, but the umpire deemed no foul. And we have less than 5 seconds to go. Henriette Koch with great acceleration in the boat, but Pauline Courtois doing that last maneuver, and we can see her boat starting to heel, leaning, as she accelerates up to speed. And it's a fairly even start, and now it all depends on who can maintain the better boat speed to come out of this locked position they are in. So Pauline will want to accelerate in front of the Danes to be able to tack and actually start deploying her strategy, while Henriette Koch will try to maintain that slightly dangerous windward position, preventing Pauline Courtois from maneuvering and getting out of this starboard tack that she's currently on. And we see Pauline Courtois tacking behind, so she obviously fell out of that position, having to duck behind, and Henriette Koch doesn't miss a beat. Her experienced team Katnaken tacking straight onto the bow of Pauline Courtois. Pauline Courtois tacks again, and we might actually have a very interesting tacking duel. So as I mentioned before, we're sailing the Far East 28, a very light and dinghy-like boat, and crew movement and management is extremely important. We see it a lot from the French team. They are extreme in their body movements. You will see them hiking off of the side of the boat, trying to get the best acceleration with the pump out of that tack. And as we're following them upwind, they're heading to the left side of the course. And it's still a tacking duel going on. They're pretty close to each other. Koch has extended somewhat, obviously, because she is in front and continuously giving the French team some disturbed air. And what we mean with this disturbed air is you want an even and great flow of air into your sails, but when you have something blocking it, like another boat. The wind coming into your sails will be weaker and not as clean. So you will actually have a slightly lower speed. And they're heading way far out onto the port side of the course. They will soon be at the port ley line. So the port ley line is where one boat can tack over to port and actually make it to the top mark. And I think Henriette Koch is trying to push the French team out to port, because if she does and she tacks first and she makes the ley line, the French can do nothing but actually just following her behind. And as we said, in that disturbed air, the Danish team will lead the way, controlling the situation and ensure that they are first to round that top mark. But interestingly enough, one of the strongest features of this French team is that they are extremely good at sailing downwind. They practice with these asymmetrical kites back home in Normandy, and her downwind game was one of the things that brought her to the final last year here in Lysekil. And now we are on board with Team Koch. We see great teamwork, cruise hiking. As the wind has picked up, you'll have all teams up on the rail hiking for their life, preparing themselves. And it looks like they're trying to set up, just trying to maintain their speed as good as possible and potentially making the windward mark without having to tack. But we'll see. We have had shifty winds, and while the wind is certainly picking up, it's still a shifty arena because of all the islands around it. And we can see now, as we're back on the mountain cam, that the Danes have actually out-tacked the French and are leading by potentially like 4 boat lengths. So it might not sound like much, but in match racing, with races being somewhere between 12 and 15 minutes, 15 seconds are an eternity. But we still have some situations where the French might be able to catch up, because as they approach that windward mark, they will have to hoist that gennaker. Yesterday we saw quite a few hourglasses. An hourglass is when the gennaker sail is twisted around itself, not flying as this balloon we're usually seeing, but rather being tied in a knot. We saw amongst the teams struggling with this yesterday, Bissell, who had her gennaker in a knot for an entire downwind. I think it was against Henriette Koch. So, to remind you, in the Sebago boat, trailing now, is Pauline Courtois from France, ranked second into this competition, and Henriette Koch, unranked into this competition, rounding now, hoisting her gennaker. She is sailing with an extremely experienced team, Team Katnacken from Denmark, and she makes no mistakes. That kite is now flying, and she can extend and accelerate away from Pauline Courtois, who's working feverishly to hoist her gennaker. And now we're on board with the Danish team again. We see the tactician looking back. It might be counterintuitive, but as they are in that leading position, she will have to watch out what the other boat is doing, trying to see if there are any extra puffs of wind on the course, because they only have about 4 boat lengths, and with Pauline Courtois, the queen of gennakers, hunting you down, you want to make sure that you don't lose out on any additional pressure coming in on the course. As they are coming down now on port tack on the downwind, they will have to both jibe at least once to make the mark. They might jibe more, depending on what they're trying to do. And there we have it. Simultaneous jibes from both teams. And I will call it. It's a better jibe from the French gennaker pros. As we're following them here now, it might look like they're pretty even. But we will have to see once they come down to the bottom mark to see if Pauline has actually been able to close that gap a little more. So the Switzer boat to the right of the screen is French team with Henriette Koch at the helm, and with the Sebago kite we have Pauline Courtois of France and Normandy with Match in Pink powered by Normandy Elite team. They're fast approaching, and it looks like they might potentially have to do another jibe to make the bottom mark, as they are now sailing a bit away from the mark. Pauline Courtois is first to jibe, wanting to have that first mover advantage, wanting to cover the Danes as much as possible, giving her disturbed air. And as the wind is now coming from behind, naturally the trailing boat has the advantage of being able to give unclean air. And we see both teams hoisting their jib. Courtois a little bit slower or a little bit gutsier, waiting a bit longer to get it up, and keeping her kite up for another few boat lengths. But we see now, as we're on board with Henriette Koch, they are working feverishly to get that balloon sail down as they are rounding the mark. And we see it here. It's a great rounding. They're super close to the yellow cylinder. We got it on screen while we were on board. And I think that Pauline Courtois has closed the gap somewhat. As you may remember, rounding the top windward mark, she was trailing about 4 boat lengths. That has been reduced to half a boat length. As we're following them upwind, Pauline Courtois, with a slightly cleaner takedown, was able to tack first, and Henriette Koch following them. They will now head up to the windward mark for a second time. And here we have them from the on-water camera. We see that Pauline has managed to get herself into a way better position than she had last upwind, her air not being nearly as covered, and she will now want to pinch. To pinch is to sail as high as possible to get slightly out in front. So you can sacrifice some speed to gain some height. So she will be pinching, and we are on board with Henriette Koch. We see them working, hiking, and here we have the boats again. We see a little bit more heel. The French team is a little bit lighter than the Danes, but in these light boats, even with only what we have now, 8 knots of wind, none of the teams will be able to hike down the boat fully. And we have a tack from Pauline. She's tacking dead behind, and obviously Henriette will match that to cover and prevent Pauline Courtois from getting any free air. And we have a tacking duel going on again. And these are 2 great teams. So while Henriette is unranked in this competition, make no mistake, her crew is one of the best and most seasoned teams on the entire WIM series. So expect to see some fancy moves and great roll tacks. So the roll tack is when you actually get a pump to accelerate out of attack, making that slowdown you get from turning upwind less substantial when you turn. And it looks like Henriette Koch has extended, so stronger upwind game from Henriette here, but definitely a stronger downwind game by Pauline Courtois. And last downwind, she managed to close the gap of 4 boat lengths down to a half. So it will be interesting to see how far the teams are away from each other when we actually round that top wind mark. And I think Henriette Koch really needs this extra bit of room, because she is not as fast on the downwind. Also, she has the disadvantage that the French team trailing behind her will actually cover her air. Last time upwind, we saw them heading out to the port side, both having a long ley line, a long port tack going into the upwind mark. They have now pushed each other more towards the right of the course, and will head up to the windward mark for starboard. And starboard, as you know, it means that you will be the right-of-way boat, but it also means that you have to tack around the mark, because in match race, unlike fleet race, we do what we call port rounding. So you come in from port and round down to go downwind. And it's great coming up for starboard when you approach the windward mark, but it also means that you will have less of a time to prepare your hoist, especially when sailing boats with a symmetrical kite. You're not able to preset your spinnaker pole. This is not an issue in these boats as we sail with the Jenniker. They do have a bowsprit. That bowsprit is not allowed to be out on the upwind, because it will then serve as somewhat of a spear. So that is one of the things the umpires will look at, that they don't extend that bowsprit too early. And the Danes have extended, and as they're tacking around, they will work hard to get their Jenniker up and sail downwind. They also will have to keep clear, as they now port, and Pauline Courtois is coming up on starboard, but Henriette, with a lot of routine, she doesn't fall for that easy trick. And she's extended into another 12 or so second lead. She has some trouble getting her kite up, not as clean as it was last time. And we do see somewhat of an hourglass as the jib is coming down, but not a severe issue. Better set from the French. I'd say they got their kite up about 5 seconds faster than the Danes, but the Danes still have a substantial lead going down. But it looks like they have some trouble. Their kite not flying solidly as we would have hoped for. And this opens it up for the French, as they are trying to hunt the Danes down to maintain the perfect track record. So just to remind you of the score, Pauline Courtois is sitting at the top of their leaderboard with 5 straight wins yesterday. Henriette Koch is tied for second with 4 wins and 1 losses. If she manages to beat the French, they will be even. And both will be sitting at the top of the leaderboard with 2 wins. So the decider, what happens if 2 teams are on the same points, is that you look at what happened in the match where those 2 teams tied, faced off against each other. So this means that Henriette Koch, if she now beats Pauline Courtois, will be at top of the leaderboard, because between them she has beaten Pauline. But that is if she can hold off the French invasion coming from behind. And we will have to wait and see. They're about 60% down on the downwind, both kites flying beautifully. Henriette Koch in the Switzer boat and Pauline Courtois in the navy blue Sebago boat. And here we have them coming down. And it looks like Henriette Koch is still in a substantial lead and will be taking her 5th win for this regatta. We can see her crew sitting duck, just keeping her eyes on the French boat. And I think Pauline has closed the gap somewhat, but it will not be enough. Henriette Koch doing the smart move, making sure she stays in between her opponent and the finishing line, ensuring that she can get across that finish line the first. And Pauline opting for a higher angle, going faster, but I think it's a smart move from the girls of Team Katnacken to just cruise to the finishing line and securing their 2nd win. As we take them down, as the kite come down, we congratulate the Danish team Katnacken, skippered by Henriette Koch, to their 5th win of this round robin in Lysekil Women's Match 2018. And we will be jumping into the 3rd match of this 11th flight. It is in the green Preem boat, struggling a bit with their kite, team, Sanna Mattsson. And in the Grey Emerson boat, we have Alexa Bessel from Switzerland. Alexa Bessel with a substantial lead as they are heading down to round the downwind mark for the first time. So the reason why we have this delay is every starting sequence is 5 minutes. So when it's 5 minutes for the first match to start, it's actually 15 minutes for the second match to start. So they're about trailing the first match with about 10 minutes. And as I mentioned before, a race only takes about 12 to 5 minutes. Should the race committee have done their job properly. And we see some struggling with the kite, very conservative takedown from Sanna Mattsson, and it is Alexa Bessel and her Cherka team going into a solid lead. We're on board with Team Mattsson as they're approaching that leeward mark. We see trimmer Nikki Blesser getting ready to rope in that mainsail to get the best acceleration out of out from the downwind onto the upwind. But the Swiss team is leading them with about 6 or 7 boat lengths. I'm guessing something like 15 seconds. You see the camera has to pan out to even catch the Swiss team in the image. And Sanna Mattsson has to do something. She opts for attack to get in clear air, hoping that that right side of the course will bring her some private wins, as we say in Swedish, a privatare. But it looks like the Swiss team caught that and are actually tacking with to ensure they stay on top of that team. We see them here now, huge separation sideways, but both teams heading up towards the windward mark for the second time on port. And as the winds are picking up, you can see the boat starting to lean. We call that heel. These boats are super light, so it's really taxing on your crew members. They will have to work very, very hard to get those boats moving as fast as you can. And while it's an indication that you have a lot of wind, that the boat is heeling a lot, you do actually want them to go as flat as you can. And we see here Nikki Blesser, strong competitor. She actually made an Olympics campaign in the 470. Really having to work to reel that main sheet in. And we're following them upwind. Sanna Mattsson trying to come up with something that can catch her up to the Swiss team. The Swiss team tacked again on them. Sanna Mattsson's only option really is to tack away to avoid that disturbed air coming from behind Alexa Bessel. So Alexa Bessel, the way more seasoned team here, she actually managed to get second place here way back. She was here last year after the swap, so she has some experience with these Far East 28s. She then made it to the quarterfinal as the last qualifier after the repechage. Sanna Mattsson making her debut here in Lysekil. This being her second WIM Series event. She also competed in the final event of last year's WIM Series in Bedan, Switzerland. And as we take them up, we can see that seasoned skipper Alexa Bessel has covered her opponent really well. It looks like she might have even extended her lead somewhat. We will get an even clearer indication of just how well she managed to sail when they actually round, and we can see a clear indicator, because that is a fixed point that both teams will have to round. It's a very exciting match between Sanna Mattsson sailing that Jenneker goes up smoothly without any hourglasses, and as she rounds, we see her pit hoisting that Jenneker and her bow ensuring that it doesn't get tangled. And Sanna Mattsson will be able to score her third win for this round robin, taking her one step closer to those coveted quarterfinal spots. As I mentioned earlier, after the round robin, we will have 4 teams proceeding directly to the quarterfinals. The teams placed between 5th and 10th will be duking it out in the repechage. So 6 teams will then fight it out to decide which 4 teams will proceed to the quarterfinals and which teams will be 9th and 10th. And we see Alexa Basel sailing at a much flatter angle. It is a trade-off between going more directly towards the finish line, but rather, or going higher, but at a faster speed. So we call this VMG, way made good, and it's a combination of how fast you're actually approaching the finish line. So for those of you who've done trig in school, it's a combination of that. So velocity and angle. And as we're following the Emerson boat, we see that it's calm crew work. They're working methodically, not losing a beat. All girls sitting on the rail because of this higher wind. And I think we can congratulate Alexa Basel and her team on their 3rd win here in Lysekil.
Coming to camera 1 and coming back to camera 3 in a second. And camera 1 slowly tight up on that.
And as they take the kite down, we see some congratulations all around. And after this, I'm sure we will get some high fives on the team. There we go. And as we take Team Sanna Mattsson into the finish, we'll have a slight break as the race